So we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Bill Street. I'm the president and CEO of the James River Association, and I'll give you sort of the overview of the evening and then give an introduction to Senator Kaine, and we'll kind of get our conversation started. We'll start with the introduction and then our conversation, and then we'll open it up for question and answers after about a half hour or so. But please enter questions in the chat. And we ask that although Senator Kaine works on a broad array of issues during his job, we want to focus tonight on his book and the James River. So please focus your questions there. And our staff, Tom Dunlap and Angie Williams, will be sort of curating the questions and teeing them up. And so we're looking forward to a really fun conversation. So I'll start things off with saying that a number of years ago, we started a thing that we call the full rundown of the James River. And that was a takeoff from the Appalachian Trail that provides a certificate to anyone who hikes the entire length, does a through hike of the Appalachian Trail. And so for anyone who paddles the full length of the James, 348 miles or thereabouts, depending on how much you actually paddle and all the twists and turns that you measure. So we provide a certificate for that. And so Senator Kaine, I believe you are the second person who has documented their full rundown of the James River by way of book. The first being Earl Swift, who is the reporter from the Virginia Pilot, who did it back in the 90s and had some really interesting observations along the way. And so you're the second one that I know of. So absolutely well done. And when I gave you your full rundown certificate, I said, you have the eyes of an eagle, memory of an elephant, and the sliding abilities of a river otter. And it was, I got the pleasure of paddling with you for a couple of days, and you spotted a Baltimore Oriole way down the river that I could not see. And so your eyes are sharp as ever. You could recall any song that you've ever heard, I believe, which is absolutely remarkable. And then when we got in a tight spot, you slid off the canoe to stabilize it. Just with no hesitation and barely rocked the canoe and kept us in good shape. So you've got many skills to apply to your adventures. So it's really a pleasure to have you. Of course, I don't think you need much introduction at all for anyone who's probably on this call, but I did notice that your book and the book cover has a very succinct introduction and bio. It says Tim Kaine has served the people throughout his life as a teacher, civil rights lawyer, and elected official. He is one of only 30 people in American history to be a mayor, governor, and United States senator. He lives with his wife and in Richmond, Virginia. So I think that captures it well. So Senator Kaine, welcome.
Thank you. Bill, and I'm so glad to do this because I'm a big fan of yours, big fan of the James River Association. You guys really helped me on the river portion of my Virginia Nature Triathlon. And for the remainder of this Zoom, I'm just going to be Tim rather than Senator Kaine. So yeah. You know me as Tim, and I prefer when people in Richmond call me Tim. If people in Richmond call me Senator, it's like when my mother calls me Timothy. I'm nervous about what I've done. But yeah, I'm really happy to do this tonight. And I love that I cherish the full rundown certificate. I love Earl Swift's book. And, the only thing I say to Earl is he skipped the dam section above Lynchburg, and I did not. And I did not.
Yeah. So you've got that on it for sure. Very good. So for those who may not have read the book, why don't you explain what Virginia's Nature Triathlon is and kind of how you came up with it?
Bill, glad to. So I was, in 2018, I turned 60, and maybe like some on this Zoom, I like to mark milestone birthdays or milestones in my life, but it just so happened that was the year I was running for re-election to the Senate. Okay, so I'm not going to do that this year, but next year, 2019, I also celebrate another milestone, which is 25 years in public life from my first election to the Richmond City Council. So I said, okay, I'm going to do something epic in 2019. After the election in 2018, the dust settled. I thought about what that would be. And I recall that my wife's sister and brother-in-law, and I was just with them at a family wedding this past weekend. They live in upstate New York. New York has a thing called the 46ers, which is 46 peaks in the Adirondacks, higher than 4,000 feet. And over the course of your lifetime, many New Yorkers will try to knock all of them off. And Ann and I did 3 of the 46 with Taylo and John. And I thought, Virginia needs an epic outdoor quest. And as soon as I posed that question to myself and said, okay, well, what would the Virginia epic outdoor quest be? I thought, well, you would hike the whole Virginia portion of the Appalachian Trail. As you know, 560 miles, 1/4 of the trail is in Virginia. It goes through 14 states, but 1/4 of the miles are in Virginia. Then I would cycle the entire Blue Ridge Parkway and Skyline Drive in Virginia. That's 320 miles. And then what's the third of the triathlon? Canoe the James River from Iron Gate to Fort Monroe, 350 miles. And I thought that would be the Virginia Epic Quest. So I'm going to do it, and I'm going to write about it, and then hopefully encourage others to do it too. I know of people who've done 2 of the 3 legs, but as far as I know, I'm the first person to have done all 3, which means I have the speed record until the second person does it. So that was the origin of it. And I actually, thought of this around Thanksgiving of 2018. I did the Appalachian Trail portion in 2019, the bicycling portion in 2020, and then the James in 2021. And over the course of 30 months, it was 76 days over 30 months during weekends and Senate recess weeks. Normally, Senate recess weeks or weekends, you travel around the state talking to people. And yes, normally in a car and wearing a tie with a press crew and an entourage. But for these 30 months, I took 76 days and traveled around Virginia, just interacting with people, just randomly as we met each other on the trail or on the river or in a campground. And it was a remarkable experience.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I have to get a real quick, obvious question out, and I'm sure you maybe get this one occasionally. What was your favorite part of the whole triathlon?
I will say, I'd say the river portion. And I'll tell you why. It's kind of a unique reason. The trail was the hardest and the longest. I did the Appalachian Trail, was 42 days in a summer of record-breaking heat, 2019. And so, getting to a water source where you really needed water and it was dry, and schlepping the 30+ pound pack up and down the hill and camping every night in different weather, that was very hard. But what I realized, Bill, is of the 560 miles of the trail in Virginia, I had probably done over the course of my life 70 or 80 miles of it repeatedly, like really nice sections like the Priest or Three Ridges or Grayson Highlands. But a lot of it I hadn't done. But the portions that I hadn't done were kind of like the portions I had done. And similarly with the bicycling on the Skyline Drive in Shenandoah, I had done some portions of it, but the portions I hadn't done were like the portions I had. The reason that the river trip was so cool was of the 350 miles, I had probably done 60 miles or so, all above Richmond and fall line of the James Richmond. I'd never done the tidal section. I'd never done much of anything between Lynchburg and Richmond. And so the thing that was cool about the river trip was the parts that I hadn't done were so surprising and different and really challenging. I mean, that 100+ miles of the tidal James below Richmond, when you're fighting wind and tide and ocean going vessels and sturgeon leaping out of the water, I mean, it truly was a discovery every day. And so I would say that was the last one of the 3. You were on it with me for a couple of days. Your guy Rob up in Lynchburg helped negotiate me through the really complex dam section above Lynchburg. How do you get access to do it? That was the portion that I think I've got this, the warmest memory about.
That's wonderful. Yeah, fantastic. So you did this celebrating a number of key milestones for your life and public service. And obviously you're running for Senate again. Some people may have thought you might have used this as a nice way to hang them up. So what influence did your nature triathlon have in your decision and sort of your life going forward?
I would say that's a long question. That's a long question, Bill. I would say I think the reason that Harper's decided to publish the book, so it's a very Virginia book. When I wrote it, I didn't know anybody would publish it. I didn't have an agent, didn't have a publisher, just had a big manuscript. But I thought, well, maybe UVA Press will publish it. It's a Virginia book. But I think the reason that Harper's said, no, we'll publish it is because I didn't know when I started in May of 2019 that by the time I finished in October of 2021, I'd be a juror in 2 impeachment trials, COVID, long COVID, the attack on the Capitol, George Floyd murder, and then all the racial justice protests in the aftermath, a contested presidential election. And I kind of used a river metaphor, on the river and in life. I don't know what I'm going to see around the next bend. And so I think the thing about the trip that was great was, one, it convinced me I still have a lot of energy and vigor and excitement about the job that I do. I do a lot of work on, open space preservation. I've got a really cool Chesapeake Bay National Recreation Area bill, a National Heritage Area bill with Chris Van Hollen and others. I've got some, wilderness area designation bills. I was doing some of those things before I did this trip, but I'm like even more forward leaning now because I see both the beauty of what Virginia has, but also the fragility of it and the dangers posed to it. The other thing the trip did that was really great is we're probably all like this, but in politics, I'm like this. My days tend to be scheduled to every last half hour. And if you have a day that's just scheduled one thing after the next, where is the space that allows thoughts and insights to bubble up? And a lot of times you might have, emotions about things, but they don't have a space to kind of bubble up and then reconnect and then form into words and then give you insights that can inspire you. And as I was living through this unusual chapter in American life with all these events, the time out on the river, you and I canoed together a couple of days, and I was quizzing you about the James River and climate change on the James River and species restoration. But there's also periods, even with somebody in your boat, where you're not talking at all and you're just looking at nature and thinking about things. Or I did a lot of the hike by myself, 2/3 of it by myself. So I really used the time outdoors to allow thoughts to bubble up in my mind, form into words, form into concepts, connect together. So I really felt like by the time I was done, I started in Harper's Ferry. What a powerful place in American history. And then I finished at Fort Monroe, where the first enslaved Africans, came into the English colonies in 1619, and where African Americans begin to self-emancipate in 1861. All along the way, there's history, there are human stories, there's geologic stories, there's flora and fauna in decline or in ascendance. And so all of those things became a tonic at a tough time, but also a source of inspiration and even motivation to continue to be in public service.
Yeah. Yeah, I find that, as you said, program our lives so much, and there's just so many things pulling at us, to give ourselves time just to be at peace and allow things to kind of percolate and really gain perspective and clarity is
Yeah.
really valuable. So how do you think we can sort of get more people to do that and provide more opportunities for that?
Bill, one night you and I camped together. We were talking about this, how I think the key for me was I became a nature steward because people early in my life, my parents, a middle school shop teacher named Joe McKenzie in my Boy Scout troop, got me to do camping. And my family wasn't really into camping. It was more the Boy Scouts and this shop teacher. But then I convinced my parents, I'm the oldest of 3 boys, hey, let's go camping. Let's go canoeing, because I'd had these experiences. Then my parents got into it. And then my younger brothers got into it. And I married a wonderful outdoors woman. My wife, Ann, loves being outdoors. But I think if I hadn't started young, I don't know, maybe I wouldn't have found it. And I think nature needs nature stewards. Our wilderness will not survive if we just leave it alone. I think, some have the feeling like, let's just leave it alone, No, I think we have to be much more intentional about it than that. We need intentionality in order to leave it alone and preserve it. And so I think the right way to do things, there's policies, open space preservation, the Clean Water Act. I mean, God, the Clean Water Act has transformed Richmond in the last 50 years, for sure. You and I wrote a piece about that. But I think the best thing we can do, and the James River Association is really keyed in on this, getting young people outdoors. And if you look at other, organizations, Chesapeake Bay Foundation, others, they kind of focus on that too. Let's create, kids who love nature and then become stewards. What you're doing in your river center in Lynchburg, what you're doing with the new center that you're building in Richmond. The most frequent visitors to those centers are going to be kids. Mm-hmm. And that's good, because that's what it takes. An early exposure will create stewards who will care for this great resource long after we're gone.
Yeah, but a lot of those children, and we see this day in and day out in our education programs, if they're not introduced to the river through these structured programs, oftentimes, unfortunately, many of them aren't introduced to nature in some way. And yet, on average now, children are spending over 8 hours a day in front of a screen and less than 8 minutes a day playing outside. And so it's never been more important to sort of, as you said, be very intentional about making that introduction and just giving them the perspective and allowing them to see all the benefits that it can provide.
Bill, I agree. And then there's one other thing I would say too, which is the diversity in the outdoors experience. Okay, inculcating a love in young people is really important in this age of cell phones and video screens. But the other thing I noticed is in my 76 days on the trail and cycling and on the river, if I was at a picnic area in the Shenandoah National Park, it would be pretty diverse. If I was at pony pasture or a fishing spot near Lynchburg, it would be pretty diverse. But if you get out of those, I'd walk out of a picnic area, be on the trail, and soon it wouldn't be diverse at all. Or I'd be on the river and I'd get out of a municipal park and it wouldn't be diverse at all. And I wondered about that along the way, and I'm like 66, but I still have a lot to learn, because I think I had a question that at one point along the river, I kind of had an epiphany, which is, okay, well, being outdoors, we have these public lands, you have access to them. There's not an admission fee to canoe along the James River. So it's a classless experience in one sense. And so I wondered about the lack of diversity, and I just wondered, well, is it the absence of experiences growing up that maybe you just don't have the exposure to it? But at one point along the way, I realized an awful lot of people, African-American, Latino, and others, it's not that they are reticent about the outdoors. It's they're worried about how people will treat them when they're far away from anyone else. Mm-hmm. And they're not worried about bears. They're not worried about whitewater. They're worried about people. And if they're out far away from anyone else, will they be treated well or not? And so I think that's another, that's an obligation that sits on the shoulders of elected officials, sits on the shoulders of groups that work out in the outdoors and try to promote stewardship of nature. Is what can we do to not only make people feel excited about it, because I think they'll feel excited about it, but but feel like they can do it, enjoy it, not have to stress out about people.
Yeah, and feel welcome, because it's not just physical barriers, right?
Yeah,
There's other barriers as well.
indeed.
It's a really important point. Absolutely. Um, so, what kind of response did you get from your Senate colleagues when they heard about this adventure you were going to undertake?
My Senate colleagues thought I was crazy, and my Senate staff even more so. I mean, I would say my Senate staff had other designs on my time. But when I said, hey, look, Senate recess weeks and weekends, what would you have me do? Go around the state, meet with people, get to know Virginia better. And I said, I'm going to do all of that. I'm just not going to do it wearing a tie and in a car. I'm going to do it people powered and just run into people as I do. And my chief of staff, I will say, Mike Henry, he got it immediately. He was like, okay, yeah,
he knows you.
Yeah, and he's like, okay, I get this. And my Senate colleagues were like, I know you're taking security. No, I'm not. I know you're taking a sat phone. No, I'm not. I came back after the toughest part of the Appalachian Trail. I did like 26 days in a very long August recess in 2019. Maybe I think I did 22 days and I lost 26 pounds. And when I came back, people hardly recognized me. But I'll tell you what has been interesting, maybe the most interesting reaction that I've gotten from the book, because I gave the book to a lot of my Senate friends. And a couple of them have said to me, I envy you your friendships. Because as you know, because you went with me, I have two really intense groups of friends. One is law school buddies. There are 8 of us who have now been doing stuff together for 40 plus years. And then the other is Richmond buddies from my North Side neighborhood. And there's a group of 7 or 8 of them. But all of them were involved on the portions of the hiking trip, portions of the river trip. The law school guys did the bike trip with me. And a lot of people, in politics, you think like everybody's an extrovert, and they are. People in politics are going around doing events all the time. But sometimes what they lack is a group of friends where they can just let their hair down with them and get out on the river, go out on a hike, take a picnic together. And I think, and maybe particularly for men, like I think of my wife has got this great book group that she's been in for nearly 30 years. But I think a lot of men, their social lives might be their couple social lives. They if they're in a married couple, they do things that are kind of part of whatever they do as a couple, but maybe they don't have the friendships. And the book Walk, Ride, Paddle, it's about nature, but it's also about friendships, marriage, parenthood, aging, Virginia history, the American moment that we're living, and all those things are viewed through the lens of the nature journey. But I think that has been a reaction of my Senate colleagues that I kind of found surprising, touching, a little bit sad.
Yeah, it's a great inspiration in so many different ways. I think the events surrounding your journey and how it interrelated to your journey and influenced your journey, and how your journey influenced sort of your response. Touch on that a little bit, because it really is incredible.
I'll give you 2 stories that just connected the journey to the to the events of the day. So and these are both just the Rorschach. They're both from the hike, but I could also do some from the river trip, because again, in the racial justice moment, to be landing at Fort Monroe and thinking about that, or canoeing by the plantations that are on the shores of the James near Charles City. But one day I'm hiking on the AT in a stretch called the roller coaster, where there's a lot of just ups and downs. And it's a really hot day. And as I'm hiking up, kind of switchbacking, I'm hearing some people coming down above me. And I realize they're speaking Arabic. And I'm like, wow, this is weird. I round the corner and a group of about 7 guys come by me. You know, they're going north, I'm going south. And the last guy says, "Wait a minute, aren't you Senator Kaine?" I said, "Yeah, I am." He goes, "This is amazing. Just yesterday, your office called me and told me that you finally been able to get permission from my mother, who has been in a refugee camp in Jordan. She's a Syrian refugee who fled during the Syrian civil war. And then the Muslim travel ban blocked her. Your office just called me yesterday to say you've finally gotten permission for me to come and live with our family. What are the odds that I would run into you on the Appalachian Trail today?" And so, you know, that was very emotional. And then I goes, "Well, so now tell me your guys' story." He goes, "We're the Syrian American Dentist Hiking Club." So, I mean, go figure.
Yeah.
Then there was a day at the very southern tip of the trail. I'm hiking up Mount Rogers, which is the highest part in the highest peak in Virginia. And the news of the world is the House has just, you know, decided that they're going to do an impeachment inquiry. This is the first Donald Trump impeachment. And I hiked that whole day by myself to go to go to a shelter that's right up near Mount Rogers called the Thomas Knob Shelter. It's right near Mount Rogers. Very long day in October, raining cats and dogs, really hard hike. But because I was and if you've been to Grayson Highlands, you know, one of the cool things is wild horses are there. But it was so foggy, like I'd be hiking by myself and like a horse would just appear out of the fog and then disappear back into the fog. I mean, all day long, it's surreal. But the whole day, it just gave me an opportunity to meditate on how can I understand this moment in American life? I mean, an impeachment trial and what's going on. And, you know, I ended up fixing upon the book of Job in the Old Testament. Like, why do bad things happen to people? And you can analogize it. Why do bad things happen to societies? But in the Old Testament book, you know, the two standard explanations, Job thinks, well, I've been a good person, so if bad things are happening to me, it must be that the universe is pointless. And Job's friends see him and say, well, we thought he was a good guy, but he's suffering, so he must have done something wrong, and that's a punishment. So the standard explanations of tough times are, is it pointless or is it punishment? But if you read the book, you know it's neither of these. If you read the book, you know that Job's being tested. The God and Satan have decided, well, test the guy and see whether he'll hold fast to principles even in tough times. So that gave me a really, even today, it gives me a really different understanding if I'm going through tough times personally, or if I feel like, okay, the country's in a tough spot. Well, it doesn't have to be that we're being punished for anything, and it doesn't have to be that the universe is random. I mean, it could be we're being tested to see if we'll stay true to our principles. So, but I said it earlier, you know, to have thoughts like that, you need to not just have your life scheduled in 30-minute increments. I mean, you've got to, and, you know, actually exercise and fatigue is an inducement to this, because when you're not tired, your brain is like thinking about tasks. But during physical exercise, I think this is the runner's high, you know, like people like to exercise because at some point you're consciously directing your thoughts, kind of, you're too tired to do that. And then what happens is the thoughts that you have are the ones that are kind of naturally surfacing rather than the ones you're forcing.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. All right. A couple other quick questions. One, tell people about being the first senator to address, make a floor address in flip-flops.
Well, this was the only really bad. I mean, you know, I'm thankful that 76 days of these 3 journeys, I only had one really bad one. I'm canoeing down the James with some friends, and we pull it in at one of the 3 state parks that has a canoe-in campground. Andy Guest up on the Shenandoah, James River State Park up near Route 60 in Amherst, and then Powhatan State Park, which is a beautiful one right on the James and Powhatan. And so we're camping at Powhatan, having pulled in, and we get up. There's 4 of us from the neighborhood. One morning, it's rained all night long. I start making coffee for everybody, and I have a jet boil stove. You know what that is. I bet some of the folks on here know it. boil 1.5 liters of water in 90 seconds. But I'm spending too much time talking. And as I boiled the water, I didn't snap the lid on tight. And then when I was trying to, pour the coffee into my cup, the lid fell off of the jet boil and 1.5 liters of just this super boiling water all over the top of my foot. And I had a rubber crock on. And I will say, I was in so much pain, but I at least had the knowledge of I do not want that rubber to melt to my skin. So I reached down to pull the crock off, hoping that more skin, too much skin wouldn't come off with it. Anyway, that knocked me off the river for a couple of weeks, gave me a pretty bad scar on the top of my foot. And that was the only bad day I had on the whole trip. So you can read about it in gory detail in my book. But that was the one. I put a lot of photos in the book. The photo of my foot after the burn was the one photo I wisely left out.
Appreciate that. But I also was struck by that gave you an opportunity to start the title section later in September and what
Yes.
opportunities that brought up to you.
It did. Yeah, that was pretty amazing. I probably would have been through the title section in late August or maybe right before Labor Day. But that burn took me, you can't get a burn infected. So it basically took me off the river for 3 weeks. And as you pointed out, one of those days I was the presiding officer in the Senate and became probably the first presider ever to preside in flip-flops because I couldn't put a shoe on my left foot. But anyway, we got delayed. And so now I'm back on the river and it's like the 17th or 18th of September. It's a Sunday. I didn't check a tide chart because, I've never canoed in the tidal section. So a friend from the neighborhood, he and I start canoeing it was a stretch we were going from 14th Street, Mayo Island Bridge down to Osborne Landing. And we're just canoeing, having a great visit on a Sunday afternoon. And I see a big splash up ahead that looks like it's the plume out of a jet ski, but it just appears and disappears. So it's that size, but it's clearly not a jet ski. And so, okay, well, what is it? Now I had known of the Great Return. You guys have done a great job of branding it, including getting a great Hardywood IPA that I've enjoyed, and that helps the JRA. But it wasn't until I got down more near the Richmond Intermediate Terminal that all of a sudden, we probably saw 25 or 30 strikes that day. And, some of the fish were 4 feet long and some were 6 feet long and a couple might have been about 8 feet long. And it's just truly awesome. Yeah. And, if they were too close to your canoe, they definitely swamp you, but they don't endanger you since they only eat tiny plants, which itself is a mystery. How can they grow so big eating things that are so small? Mm-hmm. But I tell you, Bill, what you guys have done on the sturgeon restoration, and I when I was governor, I did a project together with y'all, with the Rice River Center, with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We did something together to try to accelerate what had already been noticed, which is sturgeon aren't extinct; they're coming back. And to be able to experience it and kind of be surprised by it, right in the middle of the fall spawning season. It was that's one of the reasons I said that the river portion is going to be my favorite.
Yeah, it really is remarkable. And it's such a unique experience. We can't find any other river in the world that offers sturgeon watching trips like
wow.
We're able to offer.
Wow.
Which is, just really extraordinary. When we paddled together, you said, I really want to see the good, the bad, and the ugly about the James. So I'm once you finished it, what was the most inspiring thing you saw? What was the good? What was most sort of disappointing? And what was most disturbing to you?
Yeah, I would say the good is sturgeon and bald eagles coming back. Mm-hmm. And then there's a stretch between the Rice River Center and maybe the Chickahominy River that doesn't look that different probably than when John Smith was coming up the river. The folks at Rice said for the next 30 miles or so, it's not going to look that different than when John Smith saw it, during his great voyages in 1607, 1608. So that would be the good. I would say the bad is, there's been a lot of schlocky development along the river. And then particularly thinking about the history of the lower James closing for so many years, because of the industrial pollution in Hopewell and Richmond. But frankly, any community along the James at some point started to treat it like the sewer. It was the highway, then it was the sewer, and now it's kind of returning to be like the front yard and the front porch. But the communities that treated it as the sewer, that was bad, but at least there was a positive arc to it. And then the other thing, and I don't know if this is in the ugly or bad category, is you and I talked about this, that when you were in the front of the boat and I was quizzing you on how species are doing, and you talked to me about the bald eagle coming back, you talked to me about the sturgeon coming back, but the shad, the American shad. I mean, we've created fish ladders on the dams in Richmond, including Bosher's Dam. We got that done when I was mayor. But what we're seeing, not good. We're not seeing
Right.
the hickory shad, I guess, are healthier, but the American shad are not. And why not? Well, there's probably a lot of reasons: pollution, but also, the invasive species of the blue catfish that were introduced in the tidal James as a sport fish in the 50s. They've kind of gone wild, and I think the shad trying to come up to spawn. I just think the catfish wipe them out. There's other reasons too, but I don't know. I'd love to hear your take on this. What a complex ecosystem where eagles can be up, sturgeon can be up, shad can be down, menhaden can be up or down, Virginicus oysters can be improving, blue crabs can be up or down. It is such a complex and integrated synergy.
Right. Yeah.
And there's never enough going well that we can relax, but there's never not something going well so that we lose hope that we can make it better.
Yeah.
Why don't you say a word about that? Because that's what you guys are really focused on.
Well, I think you're exactly right. I like to remind people, and we've had a lot of people who have now moved to the region, and I meet more and more people who say that the reason they moved here was because of what the James River offers. So it's really extraordinary that the river has had that turnaround. But to remind people of just how bad it was, and it truly was considered one of the most polluted rivers in the whole country. And now to have people be able to enjoy things like sturgeon watching trips, and it can enrich people's lives so much. It's really remarkable. And so I hope that provides hope, but no question, we face new challenges, and each step, and this is certainly apropos of all your journeys. Each step gets harder and harder. Those final steps, or those final strokes, those are really the most difficult. So I'll conclude with a question that I get asked quite often, and I'll be interested in your response. And then we'll turn to some questions that have been suggested by the audience in the time we have remaining. What was your favorite part of the James? And my answer, I found that I really can't give that answer. It's always the last stretch I was on, but I'm curious, since you did the whole thing in 1 year.
Well, I'm gonna
your favorite.
I'm gonna give you a tie. So the day that you and I went through Balcony Falls, so with Rob, I had only been through Balcony Falls once with a group of guys from my neighborhood, and I was with my middle son, Lynn, and we swamped because we weren't carrying flotation in the boat. So we got through the big balcony drop, but there was so much water came into the boat that the canoe submarined out from under us. And then we're trying to maneuver the canoe ashore, and it was just like a big hassle. So the day you and I were going through Balcony Falls, and then Rob was going to join us, I assumed that we were going to put Rob in the back of my boat, and then I could sit in front with the pro. But he canoes out solo in a canoe filled with flotation, and I'm ready to get in, or have him get in with me. And Bill, you go, hey, Rob, he's fine. I've watched him yesterday. He's fine. Just you lead us through and he'll do it. I'm like, well, I'm not so confident about this. And I don't have the flotation in my boat. I had it in the cart. I forgot to put it in my boat. But we went through Balcony Falls and it was so much fun. But the part that I really remember, I always thought Balcony Falls was the name of the falls that you shoot in the canoe. And so we pull ashore on River Right about 200 yards above Balcony Falls. And I thought we were just going to scout the rapid, which we did. But we pulled the boats ashore and you and Rob go, okay, we're going to go look at Balcony Falls. And you lead me up this side trail to this beautiful hanging, balcony waterfall that's maybe 250 yards deep into the woods. And it was just such a placid, I don't know, it was probably a 20-foot drop into this circular pool with beautiful ferns and maybe some little minnows. And you said, this is Balcony Falls. This is why this whole stretch is named Balcony Falls. And you know what, Bill, I have met a lot of people who've come through the Balcony Falls section of the James who, like me, they think Balcony Falls are the drops on the James. They don't know that that secret little spot is there. So that's
really a special spot. Yeah.
Really beautiful. And then I would say the last day, I got to the James River Bridge on day 25, which is that bridge that used to be the longest bridge in the world that crosses from Newport News over into Isle of Wight County. So I'm above the Newport News shipyard. I'm above the Port of Norfolk operation in Newport News where they do the coal loading. And okay, now I got to do one more day. And I've come down the whole thing in a canoe. I did part of a day in Lynchburg in a bateau and one day through the falls of the James in a raft with our friend Bob Blue. But okay, last day, and I'm going to try to do this thing all the way to Fort Monroe. And it's 5 miles from the James River Bridge to the Monitor Merrimack. And I was going to go through the cut and then take a left turn. And then it's 7 miles to Fort Monroe. My oldest son, Nat, who's a superb boater, he's a Marine and he's whitewater kayaker. He comes and joins me. And some friends with the fishing boat, like a Boston whaler, are going to kind of tail me because the water's really big there. And it's ships, subs, and, all kinds of stuff. We get out there on the water the last day, and it's a small craft warning. It's big wind, a southeaster. We go to put the boat in, and there's a Virginia Marine police officer that says, you cannot go out in that. I said, I've come down the whole James River. I got to finish today. And he was like, well, you're going to need me. So here's the channel that you got to call. And we made a game time call to not do the canoe, and we switched into a sea kayak. And that night, it took us, even with an outgoing tide, it took us like 3 hours to paddle the 5 miles into the teeth of this southeaster to go through through the Monitor Merrimack Bridge Tunnel. But then when we took the left turn to go with the Hotel Chamberlain as our visual mark on Fort Monroe,
right.
We did the last 7 miles in like 90 minutes because the tide was going out, and now we had the wind at our back and the wave action was big. It was like we were surfing for 7 miles, and it was truly remarkable. And then to finish up at Fort Monroe, I mean, just the starting at Harper's Ferry with such history in that place, finishing at Fort Monroe with such history in that place. And then just thinking about, at every point along the way of the James, people have been there, people have tried to make a go of it. There's been tragedies and triumphs and stories, and people whose names we know, people whose names we don't. I mean, I learned about Frank Paget, the great boatman, in the Balcony Falls section. I learned about Elizabeth Key, who won her freedom in a lawsuit that was eventually appealed to the House of Burgesses on Jamestown Island in 1656. I'm meeting people in the present, but I'm also meeting people who have been a really big part of Virginia, many of whom most people don't know their stories. I mean, but those 2 days, the Balcony Falls day and then that last day, were the really powerful ones.
That's fantastic. Really wonderful. Okay, so we've got a few questions and some great comments in the chat. So here's the first one. Bruce asks, sturgeon jumping in the James River in September. How can we better promote such a unique, inspiring annual event to promote visitation to the river?
Great question. And I'm going to give you advice. Even though I have my iPad plugged in, I'm getting a low power warning. So if you see me cut out 2 minutes early, it's not that I'm I'm avoiding a question. Okay, so yeah, I think, well, look, James River Association, you guys do a good job, and the partnership you have with Hardywood is really good, because I think it's created awareness, and then if you buy a great return IPA, I think there's a donation from that to help with restoration. But I think James River Association and the Rice Rivers at VCU and Fish and Wildlife and NOAA, I mean, I just think there's much more to do. And Bill, I didn't know what you said, that like the James and Richmond's the only place that really does this. That, you know, the heavy spawning season is in September. There's a different spawning season that's probably a little less intense in the spring. But I would say the more we can do to get people out on the river, you guys run those river trips out of Rockets Landing to go see sturgeon, and sometimes you see them and sometimes you don't. But I think the stretch from the Richmond terminal to Osborne Landing, I just think that's golden. And that part of the river is pretty easy to be out on a kayak. And so, you know, put in at Osborne Landing when the tide's going upriver, maybe near the end of the incoming tide, and paddle up for a while. And then when the tide turns, paddle back down. And if you do that in September, you're going to see them.
Yeah. Well, it seems to vary depending on the flow each year. There was one year, 2018, when you could walk across the Mayo Bridge and see sturgeon breaching right underneath. Yep. So stay tuned. Keep your eyes peeled in September for sure. So here's another question from Teresa. You mentioned that the hiking portion was the most difficult and the river was the most enjoyable. Did you have a section in Virginia that you consider the most beautiful that state visitors and residents should see?
Oh, wow. You know, I would say a part that's beautiful, both because it's physically beautiful, but it's also kind of humanly beautiful, is a part of the Appalachian Trail that's called Brown Mountain Creek, which is where Route 60 crosses the Appalachian Trail in Amherst. And if you're going on Route 60, so you haven't quite gotten to the Blue Ridge Parkway yet, and there's a trailhead there. And if you hike south, you come across the remains of a beautiful little community that was built in a tiny, narrow hollow by, and it was largely enslaved people. And then after the war, they were freedmen. And they made their cabins and animal enclosures out of stone, and they've all collapsed, but the stone foundations and others are there, and it feels very eerie. Lynchburg eventually bought that creek, Brown Mountain Creek, dammed it up to create a reservoir that is now used for Lynchburg's water source. The outflow of that reservoir becomes the Peddler River. But this stretch of the AT along Brown Mountain Creek, when you hit those little, there's about maybe 3/4 of a mile stretch where you're seeing the remains of these stone cabins. And once you know the history there, and you know, and that place, and then other places along the Shenandoah where they had to move families out to create the park, it made me realize often I'll be in the Shenandoah National Park or along the AT, and I'm like, thank God people created this idea and then they did it. And I'll give thanks for the people who had the idea to do it. But I won't think one level under that, which is, you know, the people who had the great idea to do this that I'm enjoying today, there were people who lost everything they had.
Yeah.
And had to get relocated. And so, you know, it's important to thank those who've helped us along the way, but it's also important to realize much progress is built also on the shoulders of pain and displacement. And so at least to, you know, think about and, you know, say a prayer for the ancestors who's got moved out of the way. That portion, which is an easy, like maybe 3 mile down and 3 mile back from that trailhead off Route 60, really, really beautiful.
Yeah. Well, and I think what you said, it's so important to recognize and acknowledge those losses and that pain, because as you were saying, some people don't feel welcome there, partly because of sort of past events, not necessarily directly to them, but to their predecessors, and so we need to acknowledge that and make sure that we continue to welcome and build that
And then,
inclusive for sure.
and then, Bill, the other thing is it's not all in the past. On the canoe trip, I went by
Absolutely.
Rassawek, which is where the where the Ravanna comes into
Right
the
in. Yep.
James near Columbia. And at the point I did that, it was on the National Trust list of the most endangered places in the United States because the Monacan were trying to save that spit of land, which had been their ancestral kind of headquarters town until they got chased west of Bear Mountain by the British. But it was going to be turned into, like a water treatment facility or something like that. But because we were able to get the Monacan federal recognition in 2018-19, they used that federal recognition to say, hey, we got to have a better solution for this necessary water treatment facility than to have it interrupt our sacred homeland. And when I was coming down the river, I pulled off on River Left to meet with the Monacan leadership and talk about their quest. And within a year or two after I finished the trip, they had reached an agreement where Rassawek was going to be saved. So some of these issues of displacement, some of the painful history, it's not all in the rear view. There are things we can do today. There are things we can do today to make it better.
Yeah, yeah, very good. So I think one last question as we're nearing the end of the hour, but Christina asks, I really liked what was said regarding bringing young people to the James and inspiring a love of nature. Safety and lack of education can be a hindrance for many to go to the river. What's your position on improving safety and enhancing education for use of the James? And can you specifically address hazards such as low head dams?
Oh yeah, no, good, very good point. Low head dams, less a challenge on the James than other. But well, look, I mean, the 3 people got killed over Bosher's Dam a couple of years back, where they maybe weren't paying attention to where the takeout was. And I'll tell you, I had never done the portage around Bosher's Dam, and when I was coming down, I felt like, man, the signage and directions on this are not as good as they could be. I mean, they really could direct you better than they did. I think safety is first get people to the James at safe places. And so, Bill, I'm thinking about the James River Association, the way you have that set up on the Amherst side of Lynchburg, on the Amherst side of the river, which I think is a really good community gathering places, bateaus, boats, educators. And then what you're going to have on the river in Richmond, you're going to get school groups there. I think they'll be the most common visitors to places like that. I've been with you to talk to your high school students on Presque Isle when you've had the kind of leadership group there. So get them to the river, inculcate in them the safety first, and then the beauty of it, and that's really important. And then look, I'm going to be retired one day, and then I'm going to be a volunteer for the James River Association and do youth trips. And anybody who's watching this, who's like, my age, I know the JRA uses a lot of volunteers and use them very well. Isn't that right, Bill?
That's right. Yeah. So you're welcome anytime, and certainly anyone else. We're always looking for people to pitch in and help. So Senator Kaine, thank you so much for your time this evening, as well as your service, your stewardship of the James through your being a mayor or governor and being a senator. And thank you for sharing this wonderful journey with us and publishing the book so that more people can enjoy it and be inspired to do it more. So you want to plug where you can find this book?
Yeah, sure. It's walkridepaddle.com. And it's, in a lot of bookstores. I mean, like I expect there's some Richmonders on. Fountain Bookstore is my neighborhood independent bookstore that I walk to. They have a bunch, but I hope you'll enjoy it. I've got an audiobook version too, which I recorded at In Your Ear Studio. And if you look at the cover of the book and say, that looks familiar, it's because the cover shot of me sitting in my canoe was taken on Chapel Island, which I know you guys do great work on removing invasive species from Chapel Island. It's walking distance from HQ, but The James River Association really helped me. Your maps are great. I put those maps in a Ziploc, gallon Ziploc, and I used them particularly on the title section as I was traveling to try to figure out how to do it. So thanks to the JRA for all the work you do, for being my companion on a portion of the trip, and look forward to doing a lot more good stuff together.
Yeah. Also, mention the app that you used
Oh, yeah.
for the trail, and now people can use for the James too.
Yeah. So I used on the Appalachian Trail a trail app that was at that point called Gut Hook, that's now Far Out. And Far Out is a great trail app where they give you live time data about where you are along a trail. Users input information about, hey, this water source was dry yesterday, or this shelter has a raccoon in it. And so it's a really good trail app. Far Out decided to put up a trail app of the Virginia Nature Triathlon. So you can go to the Far Out website and download the Virginia Nature Triathlon, the map of all 3 of the segments. And I will tell you, Bill, I met somebody already at Trail Days in Damascus a couple weeks ago who said, because you did this and talked about it on a podcast, I'm doing it. He had finished the AT in 28 days. It took me 42, but he's not a cyclist and not a canoeer. And he was having a little more trepidation about the next 2 sections, but he was using my book and the trail and the Far Out to kind of figure out how to do it. And I gave him some tips.
Fantastic.
So my hope is that, again, I think I'm the first person to do the Virginia Nature Triathlon, but I hope I'm not the last, and I'll just claim the speed record until the second person does.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Congratulations. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We're a couple minutes over, I see, but I encourage all of you to go out and walk, ride, and paddle. Take on one of the sections of the triathlon or the whole thing. So just get out there and enjoy, and thank you so much. Have a great
All right. Thanks,
evening.
Bill. Take care. Everybody have a great night.
Good night.